people to get this president through the next election without having lost Vietnam. Just like President Obama right now is determined to get through the next election without having withdrawn from Afghanistan and not subjecting himself to being called a loser, a quitter, a weakling, or anything else. A lot of people are going to die for that reason. And it's not a good reason, but it's a very presidential American reason. Now, so I decided that's one thing I could do. And I copied them. Ultimately, somebody was asking me here tonight about Bradley Manning. Well, Bradley Manning, taking use of the digital, is accused. How many people here know Bradley? How many do not know? Being honest, how many do not know Bradley Manning? You all know? Okay, well, you mostly know. He's accused of putting out hundreds of thousands of pages, which you can do now with scanning, with the digital technology. Now, I couldn't have done that. I used the cutting-edge technology of my day, Xerox. I couldn't have done it without that. Little commercial here. Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I put out as much as I could have then, 7,000 pages of top-secret documents, and gave them to the Senate. They were afraid of putting them out, and I'm just going over here fast because most of you know it. I was put on trial. They tried to enjoin the press for the first time in our history. They enjoined the New York Times, couldn't print anymore, so I gave them then to the Washington Post, and they enjoined the Post. Then I gave them to the Boston Globe, and ultimately 17 newspapers, 4 injunctions, joined this wave of civil disobedience because the president was telling them every day, and the Attorney General, this is virtually treason. They used the word treason, though they didn't charge me with it because that would be unconstitutional, it so happens. They'd have to admit that aiding the American people is aiding the enemy, sort of. And they didn't want to do that, but they did for the first time indict me, prosecute me for 12 felony counts, 115 years possible sentence. For the first prosecution there ever was for a leak to the American people. And there have been 3 before Obama. I was the first for whistleblowers, for leaking. President Obama has brought 5 such prosecutions. And he's going after Julian Assange, would be 6. That would be twice as many as all previous presidents put together. Okay. So I actually, in no case really were those indictments constitutional, but the Supreme Court has never yet addressed that issue. Anyway, I thought, okay, this is one thing I can do. I've got documentary evidence then of all this stuff. I'll put it out. And ultimately it did come out in 17 different, actually no, with the Times and Post, it was 19 different newspapers, and I was put on trial. Well, come up to the present. Bradley Manning is accused, as I say, of putting out 100,000 pages. He's in the military. So he's subject, he's not really fully protected by the Bill of Rights, as I was. He's subject to the Universal Code of Military Justice, which I'm sure a number of the police here were in the service and know what that's like. And it's not exactly the Bill of Rights, but you lose a lot of civilian rights when you go into the military. The courts have held. So he may well serve out the sentence that I was facing, life in prison, which is what I expected. Meanwhile, he was subject to something I certainly wasn't subject to. They put him in jail, and essentially they tortured him for 10 months in isolation. Now, a lot of people in this country are in isolation for prolonged periods in prisons. But the eye has been turned on that, in particular because of Bradley Manning, that is, in fact, a form of torture. The UN rapporteur, special person looking at the issue of torture worldwide, has been trying to get at Bradley Manning, and they won't let him see him, except in the presence of a guard, taping everything he says. They haven't actually let him in. Dennis Kucinich tried to see him in Quantico, where I used to be in the Marine Corps, in basic school. And I was ashamed of what the Marine Corps was doing with Bradley in this jail, keeping him totally isolated for 10 months. And Dennis Kucinich tried to get in there and see his conditions, was not allowed in as a member of Congress to see him. Now, that's not the democracy that we fought for a couple hundred years ago. I say we, the founders of this country. There was something like a constitution, there was something like a coup. At least 10 years ago, there was a coup by Cheney, Bush, Addington, the others, who I think fitted the definition in an oath that I took, as did Bradley Manning take, and all of them took, in the Marine Corps, in the State Department, in the Defense Department, where I was, in the Marine Corps, and every congressperson has taken the same oath. Every member of the government, every civilian and officer. The enlisted men take a slightly different oath. But every officer and every civilian takes an oath, and it is not to the president, or the commander-in-chief. And it is not an oath to secrecy. I'd signed promises to keep secrets as a condition of employment a dozen times. I broke that promise, no question. But in terms of the oath of office that I'd taken, the oath was to uphold and defend, support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And Cheney, Bush, Addington, the other lawyers were, in the sense of that oath, domestic enemies of the Constitution. And they did everything they could to avoid it. And Bradley Manning was obeying his oath. And that's why he's in prison today. Now, unfortunately, I have to say, the present administration, which I had much higher hopes for, not very high actually, but higher than what we've seen, has maintained these same unconstitutional practices ever since, without any question. Anyway, Manning finally, because of protests like this, and no other reason, finally was moved out of Quantico to the general prison population in Leavenworth. And still, he's been 2 years almost in prison, still hasn't gone to trial or faced formal final charges. That'll come. Now, I identified with this young man without having met him or been able. I wanted to visit him, but I couldn't. Right away, when I read that he had said in the chat logs that led to his being imprisoned with an informer named Adrian Lamo, it so happens, and it's not clear whether these chat logs are admissible in prison or not, in the court or not. They're hearsay. I don't know how that'll come out. But in the chat logs, he said, "I'm prepared to go to prison for life or even be executed." Wow. And I thought, I've been waiting 40 years to hear that from somebody. That's where I was 40 years ago. And I know how that feels, and it's appropriate. It's absolutely appropriate. Why was he doing that? He was the source, he's accused, I should say. Accused, we don't know, but he's the source accused of the video of the people shooting down people on the streets of Iraq. The civilian clothes, 2 of them Reuters employees, one with a camera, who is shot down. And WikiLeaks gave that the title Collateral Murder when they put it out. Well, now a lot of people criticized that they'd been so judgmental on this, and called it. Look, what we saw in that video, and there's an 18-minute version. How many people have seen that? How many have not seen that? Okay, take a look on Google or YouTube, Collateral Murder, that'll get you to it. And look at the whole version, 38 minutes of it. And there may have been people in that, it's not clear, who had one AK-47, which is not very uncommon in Baghdad in the last 10 years. But the Reuters person was mistaken for an AK-47 person holder because of his camera. And he's shot down. You see him crawling away in civilian clothes. Actually, this one was the driver. I think the cameraman was shot right away. And the driver from Reuters is crawling away. You know from the talk on the video that a ground squad is on its way, is just blocks away, and is coming to these people who are lying on the street. I think 15 or 17 people are lying on the street, shot down by this helicopter. So here's a guy crawling away, and they shoot him down as he's crawling away wounded. He was the Reuters journalist. Okay, I was a company commander in the Marine Corps. I was a platoon leader. I was a battalion training officer. I won't go through that history. The point is that I had trained people on the laws of war and what they're supposed to do, and I knew that was murder. Not all killing in war is murder, obviously, but a lot of it is, and a lot of it has gone on in Iraq and is going on right now and in Afghanistan, and that was murder. Now, of course, nobody in the military has been disciplined for that shooting, that video, and what came out was, by the way, it was the same helicopter, it turned out, that a month earlier some people were trying to surrender to them. Arms down, hands in the air, waving a white flag, trying to surrender. So they call back and they say, what should we do to their officers? These people are trying to surrender. They say, well, you can't surrender to a helicopter. Shoot them. So they shoot them, shot them. Now that's murder. Shooting people who are trying to surrender is murder. But as two people testified, this is kind of an everyday occurrence. It wasn't the fault of the people in the helicopter in a sense. They were obeying the ROE, the rules of engagement. Those were the orders. So it's the people who gave them those orders who were criminal and would be subject to an international court in the absence of doing this. Okay, so why did Bradley, if he did do it, why did he do it? Well, he gave a reason in the chat logs. He said he had investigated, he had turned people over to the Iraqi police who were alleged to be dissidents or insurgents. But he had their files, and they were in Iraqi and Arabic, so he had them translated by the translator, and he discovered that they were academics who were protesting the corruption of the government. And that's why they were being turned over, as they knew, to be tortured. So he ran to his officer, the intelligence officer, and he said, look what we have here. This is terrible, we got to change this. The officer said, to hell with that, that's not your job. Do your job and get more people to turn over. Now, turning people, first of all, torturing, there are people in this country, in fact, a majority of people say, well, in a situation like this, you got drowned out by the train. Can you repeat what you just said? Oh, sorry. I'm saying there are people in this country who have learned in the last 10 years from their leaders, including Cheney and Bush, who are unabashedly still saying, oh yeah, waterboarding, I ordered it. Fine, glad I did it, and so forth. Well, fine. They should have a fair trial for doing that, and be judged by a jury of their peers. Too late for impeachment now, but not too late for prosecution, actually, in front of because they're Americans. They have a right to their opinion, which is that torture is necessary, torture is therefore legitimate, torture saves lives. They're wrong. They have a right to say that, and they have a right, when they give orders to do it, to be tried by a jury of their peers, because that is a crime. And whether it should be a crime or not, and it should be, but whether it should be a crime or not, it is a crime, and it still is a crime, and I'll tell you one other thing. It is a crime to turn people, it is a crime to turn people over to Iraqi police who are going to torture them, or to send them anywhere else. Now we've learned that we sent people for torture by Gaddafi, demon in charge, and the papers have now come out that we were sending people to this demon for torture, and to Mubarak also, and to Syria, right now. Okay, we were doing all that. That is as criminal as torturing them ourselves, which we were also doing. And third, it is necessary to investigate any credible report of torture. Again, this is international law, and it is domestic law, U.S. law, and not just one law, but several laws. What was being revealed in the WikiLeaks documents that somewhere, and somebody, and I'll give Bradley Manning credit for it since he's accused, revealed, was that President Obama is still turning people over to be tortured, and that is a crime. It is a high crime and misdemeanor for which he could be impeached. He's not going to be impeached, but it's an impeachable offense, and it's a prosecutorial offense, and is shaming us if we go along with it. Bradley Manning decided not to go along with it. He knew it was being covered up, and by the way, he was told not to investigate further. Well, the WikiLeaks cables that came out show hundreds of cases of people complaining about the torture, reporting it, and in some cases complaining about it. And in every case, they get a stock order: do not investigate further. That is an illegal order, which should, blatantly illegal, which should be disobeyed. As far as we know, one person disobeyed it. The guy who's accused of disobeying it is Bradley Manning, and that's why he's in Leavenworth. And we got the WikiLeaks disclosures. Okay. I put this out. It came out in 19 newspapers. It's funny, I was just watching J. Edgar movie last night, 2 nights ago. It was kind of funny because his big moment of triumph ever was finding the Lindbergh kidnapping. And that brought back memories to me, because when my wife and I, Patricia and I, were evading the FBI while we were putting out all these papers, all in Cambridge, they were searching all over the world, junketing, I think, places they wanted to visit. And the word was that we were subject to the biggest FBI manhunt since the Lindbergh kidnapping. But there was another interesting connection. J. Edgar, in his last year or so, was very ill. He wanted to preserve his legacy, and he stopped cooperating with the White House on illegal acts that he had often done for them before, and that Nixon wanted them to do. Now, they were very interested in stopping me, not from the Pentagon Papers, which had already come out, and I was on trial, facing 115 years. So, I was on trial. They were interested in keeping me from putting out anything on Nixon, which went beyond the Pentagon Papers. The Pentagon Papers ended in 1968. So it didn't affect Nixon right away, and he was glad to see the Democrats blamed for what they had done, the crimes that these things showed. But when it turned out, he says, can't we, now that they're leaking them out, we'll leak out the stuff we want. And he wanted to put out the Ziem assassination. The assassination by people in coordination with the U.S. of our dictator that we had installed 10 years earlier in Vietnam, No Dinh Diem. And he was very anxious to show the top secret documents, which I had actually, that showed that President Kennedy, a Catholic president, had been complicit in the murder of a Catholic head of state. And why did he want to discredit the presidency like that? No, he wanted to discredit the Democrats because he was afraid that Ted Kennedy would run against him as another Catholic candidate. And he wanted to show that Ted Kennedy's brother had actually murdered a Catholic head of state. So he leaked that out. That was the one thing that came out, top secret, that my people hadn't gotten around to putting out yet. But he then learned that I had stuff on him, including nuclear threats against North Vietnam that he'd been making since 1969. So he had to shut me up. And in this country, at that time, to keep me from telling truth that I hadn't yet told, he had to commit crimes. So he sent people into the psychoanalyst office that I'd had a couple years before, and to get information with which to blackmail me into silence. It was often said that the point of that was to smear me. Well, they were already accusing me of 12 felony counts. They didn't need that. But what they wanted was to threaten me with stuff that I wouldn't want public, and that they could then get me to be silent. So they were investigating me every kind of way. I have to, Pat Buchanan, if you've ever heard of him. Pat Buchanan was touting a book, and he was on Charlie Rose, and he said, we in the White House, he was in the White House, he said, I was then a bachelor at that time, he said, we knew every detail of Ellsberg's sex life. He said, I told him not to put it out, it would only improve his numbers. So they didn't do that, but they tried to get something on